Let's go ahead and get going. Today we're talking about one of my favorite clinical topics. And again, I apologize, I've got an allergy thing today. Excuse me, but one of my favorite topics, which is how to use your brain, your body, and your nervous system in therapy. But we're going to be talking about one portion of it, which is really about grounding, resourcing, connecting, really about safety. Because as we know, safety is imperative for people to be able to function, to be able to heal. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is from a nervous system perspective. We might down the road, and maybe if I can get Rhonda Kellaway, who did our somatic experiencing training a couple of months ago, maybe she and I can do something together. Rhonda, if you're watching, I know you're signed up for today. That would be fun for me. If we could perhaps do something together that's more about treatment, because we've done an introduction now to somatic experiencing. We're going to talk about resourcing, grounding, connecting, and then there's some pieces that might include actually how to do more somatic therapy. So I can tell you, I do not come to somatic therapy by training. I graduated in 1992. And I had been trained, I'll tell you a little history about how this came to be, in really contemporary psychodynamic psychotherapy. I was very psychodynamic. I had been in an amazing psychodynamic therapy, really life-changing for me. I still consider myself very psychodynamic, but I got that training and off I went, all excited to see clients. And, back in 92, the mind was still considered, I remember sitting in classes and having these very intense discussions about how the mind was, as Freud said, a bubbling cauldron. Not really, it was like this mythical thing that we didn't really understand much about. And, some folks absolutely have a spiritual way that they hold the mind, the body, and none of this is to say that doesn't exist, but we're also going to include the brain, the nervous system. So I did not come to this in any kind of natural way. So I had this experience pretty early on. This young woman was referred to me. I guess I was a young woman at the time. She was a little younger than I was. And she had had a horrible sexual assault that was, days long. It was horrible on a college campus. It was really pretty bad. And I went in, I was very interested in trauma work at that time because I had worked on an addiction unit while I was going to school. And what I ended up discovering was, lo and behold, many of these folks had these horrible trauma histories, which at that time there wasn't really that link being made between trauma and addiction. Well, now we know those are inextricable. So this woman comes to me. And, we're trying to work with, I'm really scrambling to get consultation and to figure out what to do. I should have probably referred her out at that point, but I didn't really know where else to refer her. So anyway, long story short, there's a day where she ends up having a horrible flashback in my office. She's on the floor, crawling under my coffee table, sobbing, asking to be, somebody help me, somebody help me. And I remember standing there thinking, this is nuts. I'm not helping her. In fact, I think I'm doing quite the opposite. What? There has to be something better than this. And at that point, there just wasn't. Well, a few years later, I work, our main office is in Park Ridge, and I end up getting this flyer for a workshop. These happened all the time at Lutheran General. And somebody was going to be coming and talking about traumatic stress. And well, that sounds good, how traumatic stress affects the brain and the body. And I thought, this is what we need. So I go in and I sit down and I'm in the auditorium, and the auditorium isn't completely full. I don't know if any of you were there on that day, but the auditorium isn't overly full. And all I see is a stool and a microphone. And I thought, well, are we here, what are we here for today? This is kind of what the setup looked like for it. I really did not know what to expect. I was kind of disappointed, thinking there was going to be some profound something that was going to give me some information that I needed. And then out walks this guy. He sits on the stool and down comes a screen, and he just starts talking. And he spends the whole day just talking about how trauma impacts the brain, how trauma impacts the body, how what people are experiencing are always reenactments in your nervous system, in your brain, in your body of your trauma and the way that lack of safety is held. So that was just an absolutely phenomenal experience for me. It was like, this was the moment. This was my guy. And I started reading everything I could he directed people to. I went in the back, the appendix, tried to find as many articles as I could, read as many people's work as I could, because I was not going to do again to somebody what I felt like they'd done it to this woman. But, you know, I certainly wasn't able to help her and I wasn't protecting her. So I was a big fan, and we learned all about, you know, the slide, the little picture on the left is your limbic system, your amygdala on the right is your prefrontal cortex, how those two work in opposition to each other. When one goes up, one goes down. The limbic system is always going to trump your prefrontal cortex, so you can't think your way out of what's happening. You can't always talk your way out of it. You can talk and try to make meaning of your experience, but it won't necessarily change, which you can imagine to my psychodynamic mind was like, what the what? Now what do we do? So this work, so I started really trying to explain this to clients, and this information made a huge difference. It certainly made a difference to me about my own body. And then as time went by, Bessel van der Kolk, you know, obviously I'm a fan, and I'm reading something from him, and he's saying something that I really didn't want to hear, because in the beginning when I heard about EMDR, I was like, are you kidding me? Never, ever, I'm not gonna. I'm psychodynamic, I'm relational, I'm not, you know, anyway, whatever. He said anyone who is doing trauma work who does not know EMDR should consider themselves committing malpractice. I was like, oh, all right, fine. So I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, I got myself trained in EMDR. So there's a long gap in there, but I did get myself trained in EMDR. And again, found it to be just really such a huge shift. Just, I felt like I had so many more tools to be able to help people to stay grounded, to get grounded, to work through things. It really, you know, we didn't understand the science. I don't know that anybody still does. Although I will say there are some oh shoot, what's his name? Jean? That's, I don't know. There's two, and Suzanne, I'm blanking on her name, but we did a training, all of our EMDR team, trauma team did a training, excuse me, on EMDR 2.0. And these folks are in the Netherlands, and they have been doing some incredible work at their trauma centers, incredible research on what works. And what they're discovering is that the bilateral movements, it used to be thought that, well, maybe it's a bit like REM sleep, right? That, you know, your eyes are moving back and forth. It turns out the current theory is that what this does is it helps overtax the working memory, and that the more you can throw at the working memory while the image or the sensation or the belief is being held, the more the emotions around that erode. So anyway, but you know, it's just exciting the way all of these things are being more understood, and I think they're being, I'm getting another text, but I can't attend, but Aline, if there's something you need, I'm sorry. So on we go. The next phase is I get introduced to the work of Peter Levine. I think a lot of folks have read Waking the Tiger, and I had the pleasure of at least starting, and I'm halfway through the somatic experiencing training. Again, just all this information about the nervous system. It was phenomenal. And I found out more about how the nervous system, through what Peter Levine is doing, those states of autonomic arousal, sympathetic and parasympathetic arousal, and then the polyvagal theory with Stephen Porgess has completely changed the way that I work. So I still think of myself as a relational therapist. I still think of myself as holding that relationship as paramount, of course, understanding the past as the present. But my work is very much about tracking and noticing and helping people heal what's happening in their bodies, in their brains, in their nervous systems. So I come from at this from a psychodynamic and from a very body, brain-based perspective. So this is not a definition of trauma. Most trainings about trauma give a definition. I'm not really going to do that at the moment. I'm going to talk about the result, and that chronic stress and trauma result in an incomplete self-protection response waiting to complete. This is very much Peter Levine's belief, and I would say Stephen Porgess as well. The nervous system is stuck and can't get to safety and stay there. Right? That's really the trick. And I know as clinicians, we see this. Somebody comes into your office, they seem to, you know, great session, they seem to be very well resourced, they seem to be grounded, they walk out and it's like, whew, off they go again, you know, up the scale into some kind of fight or flight response. So that incomplete response is what results in dysregulation. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I think of the way I work now as just a system-centered perspective. Now we think of systems perspective like family systems. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk to clients, rather than say, so let's talk about what your brain and body and nervous system are doing, that's cumbersome. I talk about what is your system doing? And I've explained to them what makes up their system. But it really helps people learn about their dysregulation, and what Deb Dana, who I highly recommend, by the way, and we'll give you a list of resources at the end. Deb Dana took Stephen Porgess' work and made it legible. So I remember during my first module of somatic experiencing, our trainer was talking about this gentleman who was an SC practitioner, had quit his job. He found Stephen Porgess' work, thought it was so compelling, he ended up taking it, going to some cabin in a mountain somewhere and poring over it, trying to just distill what it was he was saying. Anyway, I think Stephen Porgess has been able, he's not a clinician, he's a biologist, I think, I'm pretty sure he's a biologist. Anyway, so he's got some great things to read, but his current stuff is much more legible. So I highly recommend it, but Deb Dana talks about the rhythm of regulation, and we'll talk more about what that means, but our nervous systems essentially throughout the day sort of do this kind of thing. And what we're trying to prevent are big spikes and big dips that people can't get out of, or people living at the high end of their nervous system and being just on fight or flight, because all it takes is somebody to honk at them and they're up in a fight response, and then there's road rage. So we're going to be talking from a system-centric perspective. So this is just a graph of what I was just describing, what I was doing with my hands. So you can see there's the normal range. People call this the window of tolerance. You know, your sympathetic range is in the middle, your parasympathetic is at the top and bottom, and you can see the bottom is just an illustration. The bottom part of this graph is just an illustration of what it looks like. And red, you know, red marker is never good. So what we're after here, and particularly what we're talking about today, is giving people tools for self-regulation so that they can come into the here and now in your office. I don't know about you, but so many times over the years, especially early on before I knew about this, I wouldn't quite realize, excuse me, that people weren't fully in the room with me. I'd be tired, or maybe a little bored, or I'd lose track of what we were talking about. Or, you know, there were other clues that I didn't know to recognize in my own system that now I really recognize. When someone is in a dissociated state and they are in more of a freeze response, I could nod off in a second. So, you know, part of this is kind of learning your own responses too, but we're really working on helping people develop self-regulation so that they can get into safety and stay there for longer. It also helps us access all of who we are, right? So we're not just, you know, I was talking to a client yesterday or on Wednesday, you know, it's like her head is on a shelf, you know, and everything down here just sort of carries over this head. and she doesn't really feel anything, like very little. We've been practicing like tapping on herself. She's so numb, so disconnected. That's even hard for her, and very quickly it becomes uncomfortable. So she's not all there. I mean, she's brilliant. She can engage in therapy. We can talk endlessly, but she doesn't really end up noticing the changes in her life then. So traumatic and chronic stress are held in people's biology, not just their biography. And that gets spoken in somatic experiencing training all the time. I did a training with Pat Ogden years ago, a 9-month training in sensory motor psychotherapy. You know, this is kind of belief that the biography absolutely is there, but the biography is a way of getting into and understanding these patterns that continue on in people's lives. And sometimes it's the emotional pattern we're just going after, but I'm encouraging you to go after and to notice the biological pattern, the nervous system patterns that keep these things in place. Because once we can get our arms around those, and it can happen through the therapeutic relationship, don't get me wrong, we're going to talk about that, but there are other ways, and I have just found that treatment goes more quickly when we're able to help people get connected to their biology, not just their biography. So I really like these 3 principles of polyvagal theory. And we'll talk more about it, but it's hierarchy, meaning the nervous system has a hierarchy. And we'll go into that in a moment. Neuroception, which is completely unconscious, is always online. And it's a Stephen Porgess term, but neuroception is that our brain and nervous system is always in an evaluative state for safety, always. It's just part of being in a human body. And then finally, co-regulation. And we can have an influence on each of these. And so we'll talk a little more about each of them. So this split between your sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight nervous systems or rest systems, so stress or rest, stress being your sympathetic nervous system, your parasympathetic is the rest system. This information had been known for a long time, you know, nothing new. The contribution that Stephen Porgess made in polyvagal theory is that actually there are 2 branches, and now there's some research, perhaps more branches, that you don't just have a rest or a calming portion to that. You also have an emergency brake. So you have a regular foot brake that kind of keeps things calm, and then you have an emergency brake that your system will pull if you're in enough danger. And this is unique contribution. So what might happen in a person's nervous system is, you know, what we're looking for optimally is what's called a social engagement state. So this is a state where we feel calm, we feel safe, we're not in fight, flight, or freeze. We're able to engage, interact with other people, feel relatively comfortable. Our nervous system is calm, we're regulated. Most of us, if not all of us, is available. That's what we're talking about. So that was Stephen Porgess's contribution. He said, wait, in addition to a rest portion, there's also this really profound shutdown. So this is these 3 states in more detail. So safety is social engagement system. That is your parasympathetic ventral vagal complex. And we're going to be talking about the vagus nerve, which is actually 2 nerve bundles that start essentially in your head. They go up into your throat, into your ears, into your eyes. They're around your mouth. They go down into your organs. So it really is, it really is the parasympathetic superhighway. So you have your parasympathetic ventral vagal complex, which is all of those things: rest, digest, relate. You can make eye contact. You're looking at facial expressions, voice. All of those things impact our ability to see and to detect, to have neuroception for safety. So you're doing it with me right now. If I sat forward or if I raised my voice or if I were scowling or crunching my eyes, or, your nervous system might have a very different response than if I sit here and I smile at you. And it's a nervous system reaction. The rest, the digest and the relate. The digest part, one of the things that I want to point out is that a lot of folks I work with have digestive issues. They may be from some other, it may be hereditary, it may be some other biological reason. But one of the things that occurs when people are not able to live very much in their social engagement system is that their digestion, it starts to shut down a bit. It's not as efficient because we don't use it when we're fighting or fleeing. So people who are in chronic fight or flight, they don't really have as much access to their digest parts of their system. So then we get into our sympathetic system where there's some kind of aggressive defense system, there's more arousal, your heart rate goes up, there's muscle tension, you might have emotions of fear, anger, aggression, rage. And then there's the passive protection system, which, this was really Stephen Porgess's contribution. He said, look, so a couple of things happen to humans and you see it in the animal kingdom, which is where he studied it. If you think about it, in our neighborhood right now, we have a lot of bunnies, a lot of rabbits. And my kids and my dog and I, and sometimes my wife will all go for a walk in the evening. And, you've seen this before, I'm sure, and the rabbit just kind of goes, whoop, just completely still, not moving a muscle. Why? What does that have to do with anything? Well, if, in a good world, nobody's going to notice the rabbit is there, because if I'm a predator, I might be scanning and looking for other things. I'm not really paying attention to the bunny because they're not moving. So that has a protective function. Or if I were an elk, nobody dies, or not an elk, let's say a gazelle on the savannah, and I'm being chased by a lioness, nobody dies in my stories, and I were to be caught up by the lioness and I'm being felled, my system is going to go into a parasympathetic dorsal vagal state where I'm going to have lots of natural opiates in my system. I'm going to have my decrease in heart rate, my system. So it's all to protect me so I don't really experience, there's natural analgesics flowing through natural opiates so that I don't really experience all of what's happening. Humans have this too, and we talk about it as dissociation, and it can take a lot of different forms, mild to severe. So that's part of what we're talking about. And again, I think this is just a graph to see how that works in the nervous system. More often than not, if you think of it kind of as that hierarchy, there's social engagement at the bottom, fight or flight, and then freeze. You can have all of these handouts, by the way, so don't feel like you have to jot endlessly. I really like this graph a lot, but that's the Polyvagal chart. So neuroception, again, is just that sense of, am I safe or am I in danger? It's completely unconscious. We have no control over it. It's automatic. It just happens. Everything that happens in our autonomic nervous system is automatic. Neuroception is automatic. You don't have to turn it on. It's just your home security system running all the time. That's all, just surveying. So then we're going to talk about what you do, because we want to get into a little bit about that co-regulation piece. I remember being told so often, don't do anything, just sit there. Just sit there, be quiet, be a good listener, be a receptacle. This is, well, don't just sit there, do something. And actually you already are. And the good news is you don't even have to try. It's automatic. And that thing that we're doing is co-regulation. And that's a process through which two nervous systems find attunement. This happens between mothers and infants, or caretakers and infants. It happens at birth. It's something our system does until death. Every time you're encountering someone, especially someone who you don't know or you don't know well, your nervous system and their nervous system, or somebody with whom you've had conflict, your nervous system and their nervous system are going to be reading each other. You're going to be reading my facial expressions, my, whatever is happening with my skin tone. You're going to be registering all kinds of information. And my job as a therapist is to be aware of that co-regulation. It's the very first body-based intervention we can do. I'm going to be regulated in my own body. I'm going to be grounded. I'm going to be resourced. I'm going to recognize when that starts to elude me, which of course is going to happen because I'm human and people are going to say things to me. I had a client this week who got very mad at me about something, a highly traumatized person. She said, "You're just so obtuse." I was like, okay. It's how she was feeling in the moment. And I was shocked. It was like, I just wasn't expecting it. It didn't seem to be in context of anything. And I felt myself kind of go, woo, a little levitation out of the chair. So I had to get myself a little, it's not a horrible insult. It was just not expected in the context. And anyway, so got myself back grounded again. But the more grounded I am, the more safety I'm going to bring for the client. And sometimes people can utilize that. And sometimes because their nervous systems are so dysregulated, they have a hard time utilizing this. However, it's imperative that you have on board. And sometimes that means being honest. Sometimes, and I would say always, that means being real. That means being genuine. And that doesn't mean self-disclosure. It means just being who you are, right? I mean, I think, who you're seeing me as today is probably how I am most of the time. I think this is how I am in sessions with people, although I talk a lot less, which is, I'm sure you're relieved to know. But I try to just, it's not even an effort. I realize I have to bring myself, my real me, my authentic self to every session. And if I find myself not being able to do that, then that's something I really need to pay attention to, because it's imperative for any treatment, but I think especially trauma treatment. But we have to be aware of how we are looking at people. What is the nature of our contact with those people? At times I can feel like this little chihuahua to the right, which I apologize, I didn't realize when I first used this that the little guy on the right has casts on his legs. But anyway, that kind of staring at people because I want to be available. Did you notice this when you first started doing Zoom sessions? I felt like I was like this in my chair all the time. And then I realized I need to look around. I need to act like I'm in my office. My backyard is here to my right. The door is over there. I have to make sure I'm moving my eyes around. People who have very sensitive nervous systems, you can't do that direct on stare. And so one of the ways I negotiate this with people always is, tell me how this level of contact feels. Am I too close? Am I too far away? Do you want me to look away some? Is it helpful if we can look at each other? Do you look over your head? So it's one way that you can use your body, your nervous system, and have them notice what happens inside of them if they can. And I'm telling you, those of you who work with trauma clients know this, there are plenty of people who don't have any way, like my client on the shelf. Oh no, that's fine, feel free. Well, what do you notice? What gives you that information that it's free? It sounds like, but hopefully over time we'll be able to work with how can she know? Can we re-engage her nervous system, her body, her brain enough that she can start to feel that and know? Because of course we know people who've been traumatized, their boundaries, their sense of their space and somebody else's space gets confused. And we'd like to think, and I've had so many clients say, well, you'd think I would have learned from this experience. I had this bad experience, and you think now that I'm 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 that somehow I would know. No, you're not going to know, because it's not knowing, it's knowing. So anyway, it's one thing you can do is just be mindful of your contact with people and really negotiate that. What's comfortable for them? Have them practice it. Do you like it better if I sit this way? Do you like it better if I sit that way? Do you like it better if I look down every once in a while? Notice what happens. And everything that we do in our sessions, obviously, is going to impact people's nervous systems, closeness and distance, proximity. I have one client who loathes my coffee table, loathes it because it feels like a brick wall between the two of us. So when she comes in, when I was working, you can imagine how the Zoom feels to her. When she would come in, she'd get, how are you? I'm getting on one side of the coffee table, she's getting on the other. So, how is your, we move and then we can start. Touching or no touching, what is, there's all the dynamics around touching or no touching. But in somatic work, it's a little bit different. That's a conversation for another day. There is somatic touch therapy, which is, there are several different kinds, but it's something that I'm supposed to do. But of course, touching or not touching, what happens in the person's body, I always want to make sure we talk about, because it's data. What happens if I brush past you? What happens if you hug me or I hug you? What do you notice? Noise in and outside the office, perfumes and other scents, your vibe in your waiting room. You know, some of us have wind tunnels because we have to have sound machines. I have a real sound sensitivity. Those things drive me nuts. I can't concentrate when those are on, so I can't have one in my room. And our self-regulatory abilities, theirs and ours. Quick guidelines for working with the body. You always want to prepare them that you're going to work with their body because this is personal, right? You want them to understand what you're doing because most people come in and they're not necessarily interested. They don't know they're going to be working on their brain and their nervous system. They think they just need to tell you all about what happened to them. So explain about it, ask permission to work with their body, especially as you get to people's chests if they're women, anything in the groin, anything that is in their backside. And, you know, and again, you're not working with it, touching it, but you might notice, or they might notice something. Is there a way that they can communicate to you where the sensations are without using language that's uncomfortable to them? I don't say to people things like, oh, what's happening in your crotch? I mean, of course, you know, you don't do that. But so I'm going to ask permission about what language can we use that feels safe to them? How do they know it feels safe? I always want to know. How do you know? What gives you that information? Where are you getting that information from? Because I want to know how much is opinion, how much is what they think they should say, and how much is their felt sense. None of it's right or wrong. It just is a gauge for me. We're going to resource, which we'll talk more about in a minute. I'm going to follow and track and teach them to follow and track their nervous systems. I am constantly checking for safety. Always 1 foot here, 1 foot wherever we're working, 1 foot in the present, 1 foot in the future, the past, wherever, but always checking for safety. And I need to be trustworthy. I need to start and stop on time. I need to not have my sessions bleed over. You know, just have those sort of predictable things that help people's nervous systems feel safe. I also teach clients about their autonomic nervous system. It's something else to do. It's preliminary work before I jump in with a whole lot. I want them to know about the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. I talk to them about the vagus nerve, fight, flight, or freeze, all of those things. So they know what we're talking about. And I want to always be purposeful. When I'm doing something, I might have a portfolio, a toolbox, a bag of tricks, call it whatever you want. I don't like bag of tricks, but you know, sometimes it's a portfolio, sometimes it's a toolbox. And I always want to, I don't want to blindly reach in there and say, well, let's try that. I want to be purposeful and think about what do they need based on what's happening in their system right now. So the better I get at reading their system, and guess what? We're a partnership. I don't have to be Houdini. I can ask them for information, and that's going to be really helpful. So dialogue, I teach them, we're going to talk about what's happening in your system. And sometimes they want to ask me what's happening in mine, and I tell them. Because I think that's just part of what's needed as part of creating safety. So be purposeful, choose intentionally what you're going to do. You want to be curious and you want to invite curiosity. How are you noticing the sensation in your body? Oh, you're feeling tense. Where do you notice that sensation? As you feel this, what else happens? What else do you notice? Is there anything that you need to stay with this right now? Because for some people, a lot of people, especially early on in the work, they're going to pop back out, pop back out, pop back out. That's okay. If they can stay in for a second, great. That's fine. We're going to build it. We'll talk about taking our nervous systems to the gym in a moment. We're going to build capacity over time. We're going to talk about what quality does it have, what texture and shape potentially, color, temperature. Those are all ways of thinking about, and clients starting to think about their sensations. And what your client needs will be based in part on their nervous system state. If you're in flight, you might need one intervention. If you are in fight, you might need another. If you're in freeze, you might need another. And if you're in social engagement, then you need something entirely different. So you need to be able to understand, if you can, where are they in their nervous system state. So you really are encouraging them to take their brain and nervous system and body to the gym. Meaning, I don't know if I am not a marathoner. I run my 1.2 miles in the morning. That's for my knees at my age, that works. I do my plank, do some sit-ups, and I run my mile. So, but if I were training for marathon, if you were marathons out there, we have a lot of people here at the moment. There has to be someone out there who's a marathoner. There's usually a schedule. And you understand that if you are somehow training for a marathon, you are working off of some kind of schedule. So you'll have, on certain days, you will run this number of miles. On certain days, you will rest, right? So you're really training people's nervous systems, and they need to understand that it takes practice and it takes time. Getting to know your nervous system and certainly having influence over it takes practice and takes time. This says, I meditate, I burn candles, I drink green tea, and I still want to smack some people. So, that still might just be normal. That might be just human. That might just be the way it goes. But it also could be, if you're struggling with regulation, despite it all, you still may have these spikes in your nervous system, and that's what we're trying to get at. Got to teach people what those sensation words are. They don't tend to come loaded that way. So you can get lists on the internet. There's tons and tons of lists. I have handouts that I'll hand to people. Now I email them to people, but I'm saying to them, so there are the obvious ones. If it's tight, it's loose, it's smooth, but the more depth and breadth they have, sometimes the better it is. There are sensations of release. I teach them about that, like stomach, when they start coming down out of a parasympathetic state. Their stomach might start grumbling. They might start yawning. They might breathe more deeply. They might cry or laugh and have no idea why. They might have some itching. There's tingling in their fingers, their feet, their legs, heat or warmth. All of those can be sensations of release. So I teach them about that too, because it can feel kind of weird. So that's the first part, Dr. Maluga. We're halfway through. So do we have any questions in the queue?
We had questions, but we answered them. Most of the questions were related to CEUs. There is one question about EMDR training. And a question just came up, and I answered the question about EMDR training and directed them to the EMDRIA website. But a question just came up, and it's from Rebecca Lotzoff. I want to get a list of feelings and sensations. How do I make sure I get one? So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
You said that people could have the presentation. How will we be getting that to people? Just emailing it?
We will, if people, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. I have a little adrenaline in my system, evidently. A little catecholamine dump. Anyway, so if people want the presentation, please, I don't want to inundate Aline with a million emails, but if you don't mind, Aline, we're going to have people just email if they would like the presentation. I'll make sure you have it. But give her some days, because she also does all of our intake. So I would say within a week, we can get those back to you. So she loves when I volunteer her for stuff. Anyway, so EMDR training, yes. And the 2.0, boy, if you've done EMDR, basic EMDR training, I highly recommend the 2.0.
And we have another question from Simon Weissmantel. How do you see these theories intersecting with psychodynamic theories? Do they relate or conflict?
I think it all flows together. That's a great question, Simon. That would be an amazing presentation that maybe you and I can do together. I'm really good at enlisting people who work with us, so be careful. Right, Mark, as you can tell from being here today. So still, I am always holding the relational dynamics. I'm always holding the motivation. I'm always holding the drives. I hold it both just from a relational perspective, and I also hold it, from that two-person analytic perspective, but I really also hold it from, and what are the underpinnings? So my interventions, depending, because not everybody comes to me for trauma treatment, and even if they do, I think all of the dynamic pieces can be useful. It's just also having, being aware of what's happening in the undercarriage, in the engine, making sure that I'm seeing a more complete, what feels to me like a more complete picture. I absolutely do not think it has to be an either or, and there's plenty of data to say that somebody's phone is ringing, a good loving connection with someone, a good solid supportive therapist, a good grounded therapist, that because of that co-regulation is remarkably healing for someone. So, and helping people understand their motivations is incredibly healing. So I think I really do a mix of both. So.
And then the next question is, have you ever used this technique with children 12 and up?
12 and under? I have had the pleasure of when I feel like something is beyond me. I used to work with children all the time, and beyond me meaning like getting on the floor started getting uncomfortable. And I think there are people who just do it better than I do. So I personally don't. I do know people who do. Kristen Marzaloff, is that right? I don't know if Rhonda's on this call. She was signed up, but Marzaloff, she has a practice in Arlington Heights, Family Resource Group, I think it's called, and they work with families with somatic experiencing and with children. So she would be absolutely your expert in that arena, but people do it. I just don't personally. I've used some of it with my kids, I will say, and it's been really helpful. My children understand about their nervous system. When do they need to stop? When do they need to take a breath? So you know what you get. They're both teenagers and they're like, I'm not taking a breath. Nothing to be done. So
Rhonda
Rhonda's here. Yay. Hi, Rhonda.
And she says the name of the agency is the Family Resilience Group in Arlington Heights, and it's Kristen Marzoff.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. I appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add to anything I've spoken about so far?
No, you're doing a fabulous job. This is very good. I love how you've pulled all these different resources together. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm still gunning for the gunning. That's a terrible phrase. I'm still hoping when I can do something together. So
that sounds great.
And there's another question from Megan Mann. Is the idea of somatic experience to move the unconscious control of the nervous system to the conscious control, sensory nerve?
As much as possible. The goal is regulation, awareness, and greater capacity to be able to get yourself to recognize when you're moving up that hierarchy to another state, and it can happen in faster than that. So it's to recognize that, and it's also to help people have resources to find their way back down and to hopefully find more capacity. Because as you're taking your nervous system to the gym, you're building capacity. You're better able to do these functions down the road. So that's really what we're looking for, is being better able to do these functions down the road. Getting yourself grounded, getting yourself resourced, staying in the here and now, coming out of a place where you're starting to construct a story about something that happened. I'll give you an example. Last weekend, I was feeling a little grumpy. I hadn't slept well, who knows why, middle age, who knows. And I was just tired, and it was cleaning day because, we're not letting the cleaning people come into our house at this point, and we all have jobs to do. And my kids were just in a mood that day where they were just fiddling around and not getting stuff done. And I was, sure, everything's going to fall to me, and they're lazy. And, like in my head, I'm not saying, at least my nervous system has the capacity to not say those things out loud, thank goodness. Not everybody's does, as we know from people we work with, but I was working myself up a bit. And then I paused and I took a breath. I was in my son's room and I'm with a vacuum, pissed off. And so I noticed what my narrative was. I was assigning meaning to something that may or may not be true. And when I could pause and regulate my nervous system and catch myself in the story I was spinning, I thought, wait a second, there was this thing, they were excited, a new game was coming out today. They're both video gamers. There was this game that was coming out. They were just excited. And everything just went, poof. I was back down in social engagement. I was whistling while I worked. It was a completely different narrative. So that would be an example. I was able to get control. I recognized what I was doing. I noticed I was getting angry. I tend to go to fight. I'm French. I don't know. I'm assuming it's genetic. I go to fight. So it is something I've had to work with and really, learn to manage for myself. So yes, it's about getting that awareness and having the tools and being able to catch yourself and being able to practice them. And you're not always perfect, but you can get there. So do we have any more questions, Mark, or should we move on?
We have 2 more questions, and I just need to announce something that I just wrote in the chat box, is that anyone who's logged in with their phone, they need to email Aileen to let them know their name and their phone number and that they attended the seminar, so that we can, this is for people, obviously, who signed up for CEU, so we can get that to them.
Yeah,
but I just, go ahead.
That's complicated. We're trying to find a different delivery system for webinars. Zoom has some very particular ways that they work, and we're sort of bound by that. So a final question, Mark, and then we'll move on.
We have 2. When someone is living with a spouse that is in active addiction and their nervous system is completely aroused and sympathetic every time their spouse begins to drink, any suggestions on ways to work on that specific situation for them? It seems like a natural way for the nervous system to respond.
It is natural. And what we never want to do is and nor can we, I don't feel like I'm this powerful. We don't want to encourage people or get people to think that they should not have normal nervous system responses to a situation that really calls for that. If they're in danger when the spouse drinks in some way, like they're going to get yelled at, the kids are going to get yelled at, something's going to get broken, something's going to erupt, somebody's going to get hurt, well, then of course that's a needed state. It's more when this is not a needed state. But even in that needed state, we're going to talk about some things we can do in the next few minutes that might be helpful. So why don't we move on? Mark, will you hold that other question till the end, and we'll see if we answer it?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, excuse me. So moving forward, one of the things that I invite people to do, and I invite you to do, we already talked about it, it's that, there's always neuroception happening. There's always that assessment, that co-regulation that's happening. I want people to begin to track, and I need to learn how to track what's happening in their system. So we've talked about the language of how you can describe that. And it really is just noticing, and I think of it as a little playful. And this is one of the things I learned in the somatic experiencing work. The words, well, let's play around with that a little bit. Let's just notice, like that's so non-threatening. Let's just play around with it a little bit and see what happens. What do you notice? So let's say this morning I woke up and, let's say my jaw was clenched or something. It's not, thank goodness, but let's say it was. Oh, okay, so your jaw is clenched. Where do you notice that? Well, I kind of notice it more. Oh, no, if I pay attention, it's really more on this side. Really? Okay. Great. Is it okay? And it's always, and this I learned from the somatic experiencing training too, my language with folks is always invitational. Is it okay? Would you be interested? What do you think? What would it be like if we just notice what happens next? If you put your hand there, oh, it feels like it feels a little better. Oh, okay. So let's just hang out there for a moment and see what happens. What if you take a breath there? Oh, it loosened up a little bit. Great. What happens next? Oh, I noticed that I didn't realize that my chest was kind of tight, but it feels like it's loosening. So we just start tracking, where do things go? So I'm not sitting there like that Chihuahua sort of, I should be able to spot everything. I'm asking. We're having a conversation about it. I'm learning about them. They're learning about themselves. I'm also doing the same with myself. You want to practice orienting with your clients if possible. So orienting. What is orienting? It's a natural defensive response for safety. It's a defensive and orienting response is what it's called. I don't know about you, but I walk into a room, I'm looking for the exit. Why? Not because I think I have to get out. I always know where the bathrooms are. So I have people practice orienting responses. What is this like? So orienting is really taking in the room around you. So why don't you do this for a moment? Take a breath. Notice what your body is like. You've been watching me, you've been listening, you're in a learning mode. Just notice what changes if you start to move your eyes and your head around. What, if anything, happens? Does your heart quicken? Does it slow down? What are you seeing? Just taking in what's around you and what really catches your attention. And often for clients, it's the door, especially trauma clients, it's the door. Great. How do you feel in proximity to that door? Now that we've noticed that that door is important to you, how do you feel in proximity to that door? And I think it's okay, I'm all right. Okay, what gives you that information? It seems okay, I feel pretty relaxed. If somebody says, well, I don't know, I still feel kind of tense, we might play with that a bit and say, well, there's a chair closer to the door. Do you want to try that? I have a desk chair in my office. I can't do these things now, but I do have people do some form of it at home. We play with me moving myself back. I have a desk on wheels, moving myself forward, moving myself sideways them, I turn my chair away from them. I have a swivel chair. We practice all of these things to see what that feels like, but I want them to be using their orienting response and re-engaging it if they can, because oftentimes with trauma, that orienting response might have gotten damaged in some way. There's an impulse that got damaged because you might have heard something or seen something, that orienting response, and then boom, something happens. A car accident is a great example of this. You hear the tires, you're trying to orient to it to figure out where it's coming from, and kapow, something gets you. Take a breath if anybody's been in that situation. It can be really, really upsetting to your system. So just take a breath there. Your defensive and orienting responses couldn't prevent you from getting hit. And so it can be jarring to people when a defensive response fails. So we just want to play around with that a little bit and notice where you are. Notice what it's like to be in proximity. Resourcing. This is something I learned in my EMDR training. I love it. I use this with people constantly. So it's who or what did you need back then? Back then could have been last week when this happened. Back then could have been when you were 2. Back then could have been when you were in utero that you didn't have. What did you need? And most people don't really, it's like, what did I need? I don't know. I don't have any idea what I need. But we might start talking about who can be safe, nurturing figures. And these are some, believe it or not, some relatively common ones. Barbara Bush, who knew? Oprah, a dog, and it may have been a dog they had or a dog they wish they had. It might have been just a safe place that was out in the woods that nobody knew they were there. So it's a way of who or what did you need back then? And then we dive into it with the whole system. All right, so let's imagine you're sitting with Oprah right now. Where is Oprah sitting? Where are you sitting? What do you notice? Do you want to get closer to Oprah? And they're all doing this usually with their eyes closed. If people are uncomfortable with that, you can do it with the gaze, just the eyelids down. If having their eyes closed is too stimulating, or wide open if they prefer, I don't care. It's however they're able to get into it and feel safe at the same time. So Oprah might be, sitting on a couch next to me. Or I might be in Oprah's studio and she's sitting in her chair and there's nobody else there. It's just the two of us. or we might be on Oprah's farm in Indiana, which I don't know if she even owns anymore, but anyway. And so we use all of their senses. Well, what do you see and what do you smell? And we do this slowly. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you taste? What can you touch? The more you can engage a person's sensory system, because your sensory system is your first line of defense. That defense of an orienting, I'm hearing something, I think I'm seeing something, I'm sensing something, I can kinesthetically feel it coming. It's your first line of defense in any kind of experience. It's your sensory system, right? And that neuroception. So what is it that you're seeing? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? You really spend, like we can spend a whole session just hanging out with Oprah and noticing what happens in their system when they do. And what happens is they start to come back in the room with me. Or we might start doing pendulation, which we'll talk about a little later. Which is, and what is it like when you think about having to go back home where it's really stressful right now? And, you know, for your clients, the client who has to be with, you know, in a home with somebody who is unpredictable and unsteady, having an exercise like this that they can practice and do at home. And the more you do it, the brain is, you know, use dependent. The more you do it, the more you can do it. The more you can do it, the more you can do it. The more you can sit with Oprah in all of your senses, or with the dog, or with Barbara Bush, or in your cabin, or whatever, the more available that will become for you, and you can find it when you need it. Because remember that way that we were talking about the nervous system, or your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex kind of work in opposition to each other, like a scale, right? When your emergency responses are on, your thinking part of your brain is literally dimmed on a PET scan, and vice versa. You know, you want to have those as much balance as possible. So the more somebody can activate this in their system, the more it will be available to them down the road. But it takes practice. You have to take it to the gym. Think about any external resources they might have, and you do the same thing with it. It's the same using your senses, positive experiences. It could be people, places, spiritual guides, activities, skills, hobbies, animals, all of those things. You just spend some time using your senses on those external resources, really getting into them. And the language of the nervous system is slow. So they might want to say, oh, I imagined it, got it. Well, let's try that again. We don't always have to do it in one session, but let's just keep practicing because we're in training, right? So maybe next time we can spend 30 seconds doing it, or a minute or two. There might be internal resources, again, things like values and beliefs. How you hang out with your values or beliefs. It could be a religious value, a religious or a spiritual belief. It could be just your values as a person, things that you like about yourself, personal qualities. You're kind, you're passionate, you're funny. Use your senses. Think of times where those have happened. These are great ways to help people get resourced in their systems so that they can stay in the work. In your office, and now, you know, that's in air quotes for obvious reasons. I have people have these at home. People come in my office with a tote bag, or now they just bring it to session if they're in their car, in their basement, or wherever they are, their home office. It might have candles, washcloths, something to hold smooth or rough, a pillow, a blanket, stuffed animals, music, anything meaningful, a cross, a picture of somebody, could be any of a number of things. They're resources, things that are comforting to the person, because that's really what we're after. Again, this kind of work requires safety. Part of how you might get to safety is all of this resourcing is for safety. And you want to use their system so that they're aware of how is it different when you hold on to that rock that you picked up on that very special trip. What happens when you have that rock in your hand? This is very hard to read, so I apologize, but it just kind of gives you an idea. There's a lot of them to choose from. Drink a glass of water. You know, we did that orienting, looking around the room. Name 6 colors that you see. Open your eyes, close your eyes. What happens? Count backwards. Noticing the different furniture. I always have people, you know, touch the furniture. What does this pillow feel like in these corners versus the leather couch versus this blanket? Use your system. What is it like if you put that around your shoulders? Some people want to put it over their head. Great. noticing sounds, all of those kinds of things. Pushing your hands against the wall is a really good one, which we'll talk more about, but that can be a great way if somebody is starting to feel like they're not able to get very grounded. It gives them some proprioceptive input about where their body is in space and time. When it's starting to go, whoo, you get up and you push, just push against the wall a little bit. So using more of your senses, that's the tactile sense. All right, so we're going to talk about more specific resources, and these are more for the fight or flight. We can tell who's in which state. The dog looks like it's in flight. The cat looks like it's in fight. So these are some that, and again, the intervention as you're being intentional really needs to match as best as it can the nervous system state that the person in front of you is in. So this is a great exercise. We're going to practice it really just for like a minute. Again, I learned this from Linda Stell, our trainer for somatic experiencing. You know, I don't tell people relax. I never say, let's get relaxed, let's get calm. It's let's get comfortable. Who doesn't want to get comfortable? So really getting comfortable, if you're going to try this at home, is I'm just noticing. I'm not trying to relax. I'm not trying to do anything other than get comfortable. So I might be noticing my nervous system, I might be noticing my body, and I'm gonna all of a sudden to dial into everything I'm overriding. Like, oh, wow, these legs have been crossed this way. Whew, what happens in my system when I uncross them? Oh, I actually breathe a little better. I breathe a little deeper. Okay, wonderful. So let's just hang with that. And this is how I talk to clients about it. What else do you notice? For me, it's usually my shoulder blades. I like to adjust those. So maybe while you're sitting or laying down or standing wherever you are, see what you can adjust. And they're just little teeny adjustments, just a little bit, right? That's all you need to do. We're just intentionally finding comfort. Because if you are unsafe, you cannot do this exercise. And if you're doing this exercise, it's really hard to feel unsafe, right? Because you're attending to just the minutia of what's happening in your body. You're not needing to run, so you're not all tense in that way. You're not needing to flee. You're not needing to fight. You have access, right? And we're just noticing little bits at a time. So that's getting comfortable. And I'll do that with people as long as they'll let me. And we'll start with, and what do you notice next? Is there anything else that pulls your attention? Sometimes I have to direct people. Start at the top of your head and just move your way down. See if anything catches your attention and you want a little more comfort there. What would it be like to give it a little more relief? So that's getting comfortable. Again, orienting, which we've already talked some about. This is Will Smith as they're moving out of the home, evidently in Bel Air. But again, orienting is just intentionally and slowly moving your head and neck around. And you want people to notice the head and neck movement. But we've covered that, so I'm not going to go into that too much more. There is a book that I love. I'm going to present a few of her. This is Manuela Mischke Reads. It is Somatic. Can you see that? Somatic Psychotherapy Toolbox. It's a workbook. You can write in it. Your client can buy it and write in it. It's a wonderful book just with there's 125 different exercises. If you're wondering, what can I do here? I would hop on Amazon and order it. She talks about opening the horizon. And again, as we're talking about orienting and kind of using the visual sense is where we are at the moment. Opening the horizon. The point of this is when we're in a traumatic experience, our vision tends to get, or in a fight or flight or freeze, our vision tends to get much narrower, right? We don't tend to take in the big picture. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I might be concentrating on something and I'm feeling fatigued. And the minute I sit back and kind of look around, kind of like in the beginning of Zoom sessions, and the minute I sit back and I use the horizon and I expand my view, And I'm just looking off into as far the distance as I can. So for me right now, I am by a window. If I look this way, I can see quite a ways into 2 neighbors down with some trees and some bushes. Use the horizon to expand your field of vision. What do you see? This actually helps people get people into safety. And then you want them to synchronize their breathing with it, right? So maybe turn this way and breathe in. Look this way and breathe out. So that's using or opening the horizon. This is another one of hers that she calls centered hands. So centered hands, again, I'm by a window. So if we were in a session, I would be doing this a bit differently, but I would push my, maybe I'll do that. I'm not really set up for this at the moment, but you want to spread your arms out as far to the side as you can, right? Spread out your arms as far as you can. And then you, if you can, be as tall through your spine as you can. So try that now, get as tall as you can. All right, this is a great way to teach people about their bodies and bringing attention to their body. That's all it teaches them, really. And notice, take a couple of breaths here. What does this feel like? And then very slowly, you notice the sensations and how things change as you bring your arms and your hands together and you put your hands over your chest. It's a really super non-threatening way to bring awareness about their body and to notice all you're noticing. It's not like anything should happen, but noticing the difference in sensations. Isn't this different than this? What changes? What else happens in your body? What do you notice? Grounding, I think a lot of us do grounding, but grounding was actually, Lowen was the first one to introduce grounding. And now it can also be called earthing, so you can do it through your feet. And there are some people who will argue that, you know, it's really about being connected to the energy of the earth. I don't doubt that. I love walking around outside barefoot. I think it rocks. And I do feel more connected and present. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure. I'm assuming there's something about just more sensory experience, in part, being connected to the earth, perhaps the energy of that. But grounding through your spine is wonderful. It really enhances proprioception, meaning your connection to the environment. So I often will have people ground through their spine, meaning I just have them really feel, because we're usually sitting, so I have them notice their feet. And one thing we'll do is they can keep their shoes on, they can take them off, they can rub the floor. What do you have on your feet? I have socks. All right, so notice what it's like. What happens as you start moving your feet around? This is also really good for getting people out of a beginning of a fight, flight, or out of a fight, flight, or freeze response that feels like it's getting overly charged. You might want to get them back down, make sure one foot is here, one foot is there. So we'll do some grounding, meaning, what do you notice? And it's always, what do you notice? What happens if you just pay attention to your feet? What happens if you move them this way? What happens if you move them that way? What happens if you put them on the sides? What happens if you do this? What happens if they're planted? What happens if you stand on them? We're just curious, what occurs? Does it get better? Is it worse? Is it the same? So it's always an experiment. Same thing with grounding through your spine. If you're sitting, you know, you just want to notice where your spine is. And I want them to very intentionally notice the vertebrae going up. People say, wow, I realize my back hurt. Yes. Is there anything we can do to support that? So that's grounding. This is another one of Manuela's exercises. It's called the spaces between. And really all this is you're noticing what is it like to have your hand be in this position? What happens in your body when you do this? What happens in your body when you do this? What happens in your body when you do this? Of course, this is all much slower. And what happens if you stop here for a moment and you notice, what is it like here? Oh, and what is it like here? And what happens as you pay attention to that? It's just a really nice calming exercise. It's also a way, again, for people to have a sense of This is my body. It's teaching people to pay attention to subtle sensation. If you're looking at this, which has a very different sensation than this. And they can go back and forth and observe between the two if that seems right for what's happening in the moment. Some people need to get more in touch with that anger response, which we'll talk about in a moment, but this feels too scary to sit like this for too long. What happens if you do it for a moment and then you come back? So it's just, and also, again, there's a few things you're doing with this exercise with the hands, also teaching people just to notice those subtle sensations. Breathing, we all do it. We're going to talk about 2 different kinds of breaths. And there's, this book is wonderful. I highly recommend it. James Nestor, The New Science of a Lost Art. I will tell you that the one thing he says, if there's the one takeaway from the book, and I think there are several, excuse me, I want to be able to breathe. There are several, but one of them is, there's all kinds of how you should breathe for optimum functioning. He says, look, really consistently what the science says is a count of 5 in, a count of 5 out, or between 4.5 and 5.5. So I just rounded up to 5. So count between 4, and I don't know how you do a count of 4.5, but that's what the science says. Evidently, that's when you get the benefit. So count of 5 in, count of 5 out. For relaxation, for grounding, for presence, people don't tend to get so winded, they don't get dizzy as much. But freeze breathing, when somebody's in a freeze state, right? If you think of fight or flight, you're up here and you need to come down. If you're in a freeze state, you're down here and need to come up. So I might have people do breathing, but I might tell them, don't look at me for a moment, look away. Keep your eyes open. Hold your hands over your stomach. Feel your stomach moving up and down. I want them to be as present with their breath as possible. I want them to feel every bit of it. And that is a bit more helpful for people who are in freeze. I don't want them to get more relaxed. I get it, they're an emergency response, but we're trying to get the nervous system to come up, not go down. So that's freeze breathing. Freeze body frame is what I call it. But what we're talking about here is noticing the temperature, or if there were different colors in the body, what would they be? Where would they be? What would they look like? You're trying to get a person back into their body in a non-threatening way. So it's just a body freeze frame. Where do you feel it? Or what do you notice? Where would you see it? Sometimes you have to start with the visual sense because they're most comfortable. The felt sense isn't available yet. Micro movements, we did a little bit of that when we were talking about the grounding through the spine, but micro movements are another great way to adjust your nervous system. It's just the most subtle movement you can make, and observing what happens when you do. Again, for people who are in freeze, this is fantastic. It's not a big movement. It's not a punch. It's a, I wish I could have punched them. Oh, wow, okay. Where do you notice that? I'm feeling a little bit in my arms. Okay, do you notice anything else? No, just like I don't notice my body at all. I just feel a little thing in my arms. Great. What do you notice? What happens if you just move your muscles in your arms just a 1/4 inch, just a smidge? What happens then? And it's all observing, and it's always what happens next, and what happens next, and what happens next. And then they might pop out and start talking, and I might say, sounds like you've had enough of that for the moment. Yeah, I'm done. Okay, great, we can go on to something else. So sometimes we're doing this kind of thing the whole session. Sometimes it's for a few moments in the session, but over time it tends to be more and more. Personal space. This is a funny story about this, actually. I think it's funny. In my SE training, Linda asked me to do this exercise with her. And she said, well, you stand here, I'll stand here. A lot of us have done this. Come toward me, tell me when when you feel okay. And now I've been in the SE training for a while, and I'm much more aware of my nervous system. I'm thinking, I'm going to go up and give her a hug. I really like Linda. I'm a huggy gal. Again, I'm French, I'm affectionate, I'm huggy. And I started to walk toward her, and I got to about 4 feet and went, because I was actually dialed into my nervous system. Prior to that, I might have gone, boom, I'm giving her a hug, and isn't this lovely? All the while not even realizing, except part of me is going, I know about this, danger. And those of you who remember Will Robinson. So having people practice that with you in your office, and my furniture is sort of immobile in my office. I do have that wheelie chair, and some people only sit in the wheelie chair. Why? Because it's easy to move. And we will play around with this because they might think, oh, I really like you. I like being close to you. I like looking at you. Well, what do you notice when you turn away? And I have this exact same chair at my office, and I'll swivel and kind of look this way. You feel so far away to me. Oh, okay, so how do you get that information? Or they might say, oh, wow, that feels so much better. I didn't even realize. So personal space, you can play around with that a lot. A butterfly hug, self-contact, a butterfly hug, there's tapping, that's butterfly tapping in SE, but I mean, in EMDR, but also a butterfly hug. And this slide gives you a bit of information about that, about, what can happen in people's systems and how you do it. And it can just help people feel comfortable. A client did this week, and it just naturally happened. I didn't instruct her to do it. I said, what does it feel like your arms want to do? And she said, they kind of want to do this. And so she pulled him with that. I said, it's great. Let's notice what happens. What do you notice when you do that? And she said, oh, whew, I feel better. It's like, wow, in what way do you feel better? How did you notice that? Well, I can breathe deeper. She didn't realize she just needed a little contact from somebody, and it was her. Or sometimes I'll say to people, just notice your hands in your lap. What is that like? Because this feels weird to them. They're like, I feel stupid. Hey, what if your hands are just on your thighs? What do you notice then? So self-contact, just inviting that. There's another Manuela. It's just a sound. I think Rhonda spoke about the VOO sound, which is on her presentation, which is excellent. Rhonda's presentation on SE is on our website if you want to go back and look at it. But it's a comforting sound. So people can do it internally as a way to get more grounded in their body. It's a way to calm their systems down. It's something we say, if I eat something and I like it, I'm like, wow, that's really good. So is an associative response as well. We tend to like what we're saying to, or to. So you can have people practice that as just a way to kind of come down a bit. Pendulation, again, I think Rhonda covered this quite a bit in her presentation, but pendulation really is, as I was talking about, maybe you're sitting with Oprah Winfrey, you've got that in your mind's eye, and then you pendulate over, meaning you allow your attention, your full attention, to go over to a thought that is perhaps upsetting, a situation that you're nervous about, something in your therapy that you're going to have to deal with that you're scared of, and you pendulate over there, meaning you just allow your attention to swing over, and maybe it's far in the distance, and maybe we over time move it a bit closer. But it's a way of being able to go back and forth between a resource and a potentially unresourced state. A resource state I can handle, an unresourced state I can't. So that's really the beauty of this pendulation, is you use these resources, all these things we talked about today, to get into their bodies, to take them then into a place of something that feels more scary in the therapy. I just love this slide. Somatic experience in therapy. In doing pendulation, we create a metaphorical path to the oasis spot, where we draw a bucket of water and carry it to the part of the self that's dying of thirst, and give it to them as many times as needed until they heal. Movement, real or imagined, can be very potent. In the top left-hand corner, we have running in your chair. Sometimes people will do this. We will either notice that what their system wants to do. And I say, what do you feel like you want to do? I want to run. I want to swim, because that's my most comfortable way to be in movement. I want to run in place. I want to box. Sometimes I'll have them just do it in their chair, depending on what we're after. Sometimes I'll have them try it, like get up and do it and move in place. Sometimes I'll have them imagine punching. Sometimes I'll have them actually punch slowly, punch quickly, punch up here, punch down there. We're just really noticing what happens. What happens in your system? But I don't do these until people are capable of being in a more resourced place. And then the power of posture. Does anybody remember Amy Cuddy's work? Turns out the research on that is a little flimsy, but Amy Cuddy's work of power pose, power postures, power stances. I have people play with posture, the power of posture. What do they notice in their body when they're like this? How is it different if they're like this? What do they notice if they're like this versus if they're like that? What do they notice if I sit like this versus if I sit like this? So we just play with that and notice. Again, it's all about noticing and what material comes up next. And then finally, we're going to end. Our last thing is, again, from EMDR training, containers. People, before people leave my office, if we've been dealing with difficult material and we need to pause, I'll say, think of a container. They usually start this in the beginning. They might change the container over time. Some people, this top right one, it's a container that's been thrown into the bottom of the ocean. Sometimes it's a safe or a padlock or a beautiful box. We find a place to put the work, to put the material. They imagine it. They use all of their senses to get in touch with that container. They deposit it where they want to put it so they can safely leave and move on. Questions?
There's two questions. The first one's from Lisa Bloom. Could you conceptualize the intersection of the nervous system states and psychodynamic theory and practice by recognizing the importance of awareness of the impact the client and the therapist have on one another? Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you, Lisa. And I would say yes. Probably our presence, one of the most potent things we will do ever is in our presence. And it doesn't mean it's always perfect. It probably shouldn't be. I don't intentionally goof up, but I do it. But it's always an opportunity in the relationship. So I think there's a beautiful intersection between those, that co-regulation, being seen, holding the person, being curious, holding their motives, all of that, holding their past, their whole past, having an understanding of how the past impacts the present in their dynamics. Absolutely. So I think there's been a couple questions about that. Maybe another presentation about that would be good. So why don't we plan on that? But I think they absolutely can go together. And I think I move at this point kind of through both of them in many or most sessions, unless I'm doing EMDR or something where we really need the time to just do that. But even in that, I still feel like I'm relational. But most sessions, I would say, are probably a combination of somatic and dynamic, psychodynamic.
And then the second question is from Caroline Kerr is, how are you finding these interventions transferring into the virtual sessions with trauma clients?
Shockingly well. And I have to tell you, I was such an opponent of teletherapy prior to this, necessity. It's necessity is the mother of invention. They are translating really well. It's been slower for me. We've had to work more so that I can see the client and see their breathing and see what's happening. And they have to report to me much more than they did before because I can't see all of them. They can't see all of me. I do have one person where I have to move everything and really scoot my desk way back. I can't do it right now. You get the idea. But I have to scoot my desk way back so she can see more of me. And I am, these days, like right now, I have on this shirt and this jewelry, this top, and a pair of shorts and my gym shoes and socks. So, I'm like, just so you know, I'm ready for my day. Here I am. But it really has worked really very well. It's not as good. I mean, I'm not going to tell you it's as good. It's not as good. But I have found it to be surprisingly transferable. It's good enough. It's not great. It's been good enough. And with some people, it's actually been better because they're home. And so there's more things they can access that they need, and they can get grounded a little easier. For some people, being home is bad. I have one woman where I've said, we cannot do this in your house anymore. Will you please go in your car? Can you find a place to park in a forest preserve, quiet somewhere, because it was just too much for her to be at home. So, but it's been surprisingly good. Even the EMDR has been shocking. So, All right, we're
So-
at 10:59. Is there one final question before we wrap up, just to be respectful of people's time?
Well, there's two more questions. The first question is, can you talk a little bit about the felt sense and how you know a person has it, doesn't have it?
If a person has felt sense, Eileen, you're going to have to unmute yourself. It's not letting me
I'm
unmute.
sorry, you guys,
Okay.
while she's answering questions, I'm going to start the polling so you can get that done straight away while she's answering. Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
That's all right. Anyway, sorry, I told them next time if I'm presenting, because usually I do the record and the polling and blah, I can't do it all. So yes, please start polling, meaning it's your Q&A, not your Q&A, it's your evaluation of the workshop. So please, I always appreciate honest answers to these. So the question mark was what? I missed it.
It was, can you talk a little bit about felt sense and how you know a person has it, doesn't have it?
Ah, okay. It's really their report. So part of it is my felt sense of them. Like I said, if I'm really sort of drowsy and there's some disconnection then. So I try to notice my felt sense with them, but I also am asking them. I'm teaching them how to give feedback to me about what they're experiencing. So it really is, it's a training, a teaching process. So they're telling me they have developed a vocabulary of sensation, and they're able to tell me it feels tight, it feels loose, it feels numb, it feels like it's not there. I feel it more, I feel it less. So it's absolutely constant dialogue about how it's evolving, what they're noticing. And if they notice nothing, then we try to go with any small thing they can. Like, can you feel this? What is that like? Oh, it's warm. Oh, okay. What happens if you squeeze it a little bit? Well, my knuckle hurts. I mean, that's felt sense too. So I hope that answers it some, but it's absolutely the dialogue. So we are at the end. If you have any other questions I didn't address, my email is on here. So please feel free to send. Is it on here? It's not on here. Well, stellar. I put the phone number. My email is my whole name. It's Margo Jacquot. It's MargoJacquot, Margo Jacquot at thejunipercenter.com. Longest email address in history. Didn't think that through in advance, but there it is. Margo Jacquot at thejunipercenter.com. Please feel free to send me any kinds of questions, comments, thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. If there's other ideas you have for other presentations, please let me know that too. If you have any questions about us or what we do, we have offices throughout the Chicago and northern suburbs. Our main hub is in Park Ridge. We have 34 therapists. We treat a lot of different kinds of conditions and issues and experiences, lots of all ages. We have child, adolescent, adult, geriatric specialists. And we really, Eileen is our intake person, our intake coordinator, and she really works hard to match people really well with the right clinician. So she really takes her time to do that. And I think the things that we probably do the most, we have an EMDR trauma team, which is fabulous. We have our monthly meeting today to talk about EMDR and trauma. We have a child and adolescent team. We have a queer team is what they call themselves, LGBTQ youth adults. We have couples and adolescents, and we have an addictions team. I hope I got them all. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Please do finish your questionnaires. We very much appreciate it. We're at 94% have filled in so far. So please continue to fill in, much appreciated. It helps us do these hopefully better in the future. All right, everyone, be well. Have a good rest of the day. Happy weekend to you.